That's right, people. Your eyes aren't deceiving you. We're skipping ahead 3 episodes in Shonen Jump Works, partially due to writer's block, needing to write about One Piece and Naruto in about 10 minutes, and partially because Shaman King has gotten an anime remake, and it seems to be unjustly stuck in the Netflix penitentiary system. However, that will not stop us at Shonen Jump Works, where our motto is read the manga. Sidebar, unless otherwise stated, I am mostly basing my assessment on the first 100 or so chapters to make series like Bleach and Naruto, when we get to them, and One Piece, easier to talk about. While that may not be enough chapters to get the entirety of the plot, it should be more than enough to find out why a series is special and what its core ethos is, which is what Shonen Jump Works is about. Shaman King is another post-Dragon Ball genre fiction jump classics that's now in the Kodansha wheelhouse. And like a lot of series in Shonen Jump Works that specifically are not Dragon Ball, Naruto, Bleach, and One Piece, they are very much beloved and well-liked, but fail to reach that evergreen status to be an eternal staple of the anime zeitgeist. Think more of a Gash Bell or Ultimate Muscle than a Full Metal Alchemist or Hunter x Hunter. However, Shaman King did get a pretty reasonable time in the spotlight, and its popularity in the West would be somewhat calculated based on what normally strikes home. Big anime fights, as per Dragon Ball Z, and supernatural creatures, or spirits in this case, that do a lot of fighting, alongside a notably less powerful human teammate. But let's back up for a second. Shaman King is the work of Hiroyuki Takei, who previously worked as an assistant alongside the man himself, Ichiro Oda, on the infamous Can You Separate the Art from the Artist conversation staple, Rurouni Kenshin. People tend to characterize assistants as being quiet background working ants with no real interest that they're working on, but this isn't really the case. You can already see Takei's influence, and for that matter, Ichiro Oda's influence, blend into Kenshin. For Oda, it was the quiet, childlike fascination with queer culture without the vocabulary or lived experience to discuss or describe it that would actually be a very important part of One Piece, and for Takei, his fascination with the seemingly mundane parts of other cultures, societies, and lifestyles, and retrofitting that into almost an attraction-like version of itself that normally fits into cool anime fights, resulting in Shaman King. Shaman King is the story of Yo Asakura, or in the very earliest chapters, his suspiciously Gigigi no Kitaro look-alike best pal, Manta. Yo, for lack of better words, is a hippy-dippy shaman, complete with weed shirt. Yo believes in the power of friendship and hard work and all that stuff, but unlike Goku, who lives to train, or Luffy, who loves adventure, Yo is mostly typically chill out. He doesn't like fighting. However, he is aiming to become the Shaman King and win the Shaman fight. The Shaman fight is a tournament held every couple of centuries to find the next messiah of the new age and become one with the Great Spirit. Yo, being a person who is surprisingly humble in ambition, but primarily seeks to be the Shaman King so he can live a life of relative luxury where he can just chill out for the most part, but is willing to endure harsh physical and mental preparation for several years and become one with God just for the opportunity to have a life of relative comfort. Well, if that isn't a millennial way, then I don't know what is. Along the way, Yo makes several friends and would-be teammates that occasionally even fight against him, including his primary ghost partner, the legendary samurai Midamaru, his non-shaman pal Manta, Yo's fiancée, the very openly loving yet extremely cruel and militant Anna, who aims to make Yo the Shaman King, so she will also be able to live a life of relative luxury as the Shaman First Lady. Normally, mean girlfriend characters carry a certain misogynistic vibe, but I think anyone who has ever taken a hit of the devil's lettuce knows a stoner really isn't the person that's going to work especially hard left to their own devices, so Yo kind of does need someone lighting a fire under him, even if that fire is sometimes a little bigger than what's usually necessary. The pompadour punk-turned-shaman Bokuto Ryu, and, as far as I can tell, the first notable depiction of an ethnically Ainu person in Shonen Jump, Horo, and other friends and allies that you may find a pleasant surprise if you read past 100 chapters, and some that have implications beyond the scope of this video. Now, I'm keeping this somewhat vague because I'm sticking to the first 100 or so chapters, partially to make it easier for me to talk about, and partially because I haven't finished it. But it also seems to be a very good sampling of, again, not the plot, but the general ethos of the series. And the ethos for Shaman King is that everyone has a person. And perhaps this logic doesn't always apply one for one in the real world, but it certainly does in most instances of Jump series. Every time someone decides to choose violence, it is a choice. Now, it is a choice that is deeply informed by their material conditions, but ultimately it is a choice that you can simply choose not to do. Every villain and enemy that Yo fights, he chooses to find good in that person. Or at the very least, he chooses to believe that there's a good person hidden under what's more than likely years of trauma, or years of needing to fight to survive, or years of having whatever it is that they believe twisted around to bring them to the place that they are today. And while the road to hell is paved with good intentions, Yo generally believes that it's just that, a road, and it's never too late to simply turn around. In fact, he's convinced that only people that are genuinely good are able to see ghosts. However, the issue is what constitutes a good person here. A good person here tends to be somewhat relative. For example, his early rival term grumpy friend Tao Rin is introduced as ready to murder several people in cold blood. However, he aims to become the Shaman King to restore the environment, and in fact, quite a few shamans that we see along the way are aiming to do something somewhat similar and have at least somewhat noble goals in becoming the Shaman King. In fact, several characters, including some of the worst ones you'll see, while they may be evil and take delight in hurting people, do basically have more or less benign reasons for wanting to become the Shaman King, and may even have goals that are a net good for the world and society. Although ironically for Shaman King's extremely hippy-dippy nature, there seems to be a somewhat contemptuous vibe to the way it handles people acting on the conditions that they are surrounded by. And while there is an argument for that, and extremely out of the scope of this video, an argument for the ideas of eco-fascism, that would require me to conveniently ignore the general ethos behind Shaman King of peace, love, and chillin' out. That said, while Shaman King does handle its ideas about culture in a very Disneyland, it's a small world after all way, Shaman King also has to have a pretty solid idea around these cultures and chooses to interpret it in a very cartoony way. For example, Takei seems to have a very solid idea about the various roles that shamans play in various societies, from healers, fortune tellers, necromancers, political leaders, and a dynamic understanding of the way that the concept of spirits and spirituality manifests themselves in culture to culture, from ghosts that have died to natural spirits, animal spirits, with a vague idea and action of their own, but no actual will or ego that a person would have. In fact, the idea for the not quite omnipotent Great Spirit seems to be taken directly from post-colonial Native American culture. The way Shaman King generally handles its brawls are shamans using their bodies as conductors for the spirit, although later, to make very, very cool and marketable anime weapons, they end up integrating into different objects like spears, swords, and even snowboards. However, this isn't always the case, as different cultures have different ideas about methods of communicating with spirits, like putting a spirit back into its dead body and animating it Shang-Chi style, or even dispersing a single spirit over a huge number of animated skeletons, which individually pose little threat, however, as a group create a, you guessed it, skeleton of problems. Puns aside, while fighting is very cool, the core of Shaman King is that fighting kind of sucks. And that's true. Would rather be minding their own business and basically chilling out, because you're honestly doing yourself more harm by holding on to a lot of hatred, and that is, while it may not seem like it, an active choice you make, and it also is a choice to simply decide not to, as the meme says, wake up and choose violence. While this kind of message does have some interesting implications when it comes to dealing with societal-wide issues that Shaman King somewhat does touch down on relatively frequently. However, it is very critical to note that Shaman King as a work And on that note, Takei, as a writer, believes that stories should exist as a play space for the characters to bounce around in and should exist for their benefit and not the vice versa, because several of Shaman King's characters actually did exist in their more or less final form before the story even began. So I think it is reasonable to apply all of the lessons from Shaman King. Relative to the characters in the story than as a broad concept to be explored in a more nebulous way. That said, I don't mean to ignore the super brilliant natural set pieces and storytelling that Shaman King seems to have, and several of these storytelling conventions and its attitude towards spirituality seems to be a very deliberate callback to the opening act of Yu Yu Hakusho. And the mechanical fighting conventions and storytelling of the aforementioned Yu Yu Hakusho, along with a heaping helping of Gigiki no Kitaro, the old school spooky themed shonen staple, Shaman King holds these two inspirations as a mark of pride on its shoulder rather than coming off as just vaguely borrowing ideas. Hell, the first arc of Shaman King very closely mimics a more refined version of Yu Yu Hakusho, which in terms was a refined version of Kinnikuman and Dragon Ball. Although where Togashi was more or less stalling for time to get a stronger feel on its story, in Shaman King we basically know from very, very early on that we're waiting for the shaman fight to start. That said, I hope this doesn't come off as me pointing out that someone is copying someone else, as I unironically think that Shaman King is a great work, and as most great works tend to do, they stand on the shoulder of giants. There's definitely a lot of things I can say about the sometimes insensitive nature of Shaman King. However, I'll opt to conveniently ignore that for some other video, some other day, and instead end on the note of, as I said earlier, Takei and Oda both worked on Kenshin together and seem to be taking notes from each other, at least to some degree. The biggest one is the very loose and noodly nature to how both of these people tend to draw limbs, and characters in both One Piece and Shaman King tend to have a very nice, relaxed, and loose nature to them because of the extremely stylized way that they are drawn, where they have extremely expressive personalities and bodies. I say all this just to dunk on the 2021 anime that looks about as brittle as rusted glass. The next Jump Works will actually be One Piece, which I already used a clip of, and chronologically the next one is Hikaru no Go, which I don't have any hilarious clips of. So next time on Jump Works, one of those two, and the stinger will just be leaving you with the sound if you're